Mark always considered himself a faithful husband. But what was supposed to be an ordinary fishing trip with a colleague turned into a series of events that could destroy everything he had built over the years. Finding himself by chance in the company of some irresistible strangers, he had no idea that a single kiss could turn his whole life upside down and put at risk everything he held dear. But before you get comfortable, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I'm really curious to see who has joined us. Now, make yourself comfortable. Let's begin. Mark had always considered himself a faithful man. For nearly 8 years, his life with Sarah had been steady and mostly happy, full of routines that kept him feeling safe. But this weekend, he needed a break from the familiar. When his colleague Jake invited him for a fishing trip, just like old times, Mark didn't hesitate. Jake picked him up early on a warm Saturday morning, the sun barely touching the tips of the endless green pines along the narrow road. Mark tossed his overnight bag into the trunk, stretching his arms with a satisfied grin. Jake, tall and blonde, with a mischievous glint in his blue eyes, clapped him on the back. Jake was the kind of man who made friends everywhere, easygoing, always quick with a joke, and never afraid of adventure. Their plan was simple: a secluded river, 2 days of peace, and if they were lucky, a few stories to bring back. But fate had its own ideas. About an hour out, just as the road started winding into unfamiliar woods, the car sputtered and died. Jake cursed under his breath, popping the hood. But it was clear neither of them would be fixing the engine anytime soon. With no cell signal, they loaded their bags and walked the last stretch to a small lakeside campground they'd passed a mile back. As they approached, the scent of wood smoke and laughter drifted through the trees. The campground, usually reserved for quiet families or aging fishermen, was alive with energy. A surprise gathering of young women, clearly in the midst of celebrating. "Looks like we're not the only ones looking for an adventure," Jake said, nudging Mark and gesturing toward the largest bonfire, where several women had gathered. Someone had strung fairy lights between the trees, giving the clearing a soft, magical glow. Mark's gaze landed first on a striking figure near the fire. A tall, graceful woman with a shock of long copper-red hair that shimmered in the light. She wore frayed denim shorts, showing off long, slender legs, and a crisp white blouse, the edges tied loosely above her navel. When she laughed, Mark caught a glimpse of the delicate pink lace of her bra peeking from beneath her shirt, accentuating a shapely, alluring figure and a gentle, inviting curve to her hips and chest. Her eyes, clear, deep green, held a playful, almost mysterious sparkle. Next to her sat a petite brunette, perhaps a few inches shorter than Mark, with rich, dark hair cut in a neat bob. Her style was sportier. A fitted tank top that hugged her athletic frame and a short sky blue skirt, which moved with her as she shifted positions. From the casual way she leaned back, Mark glimpsed the edge of her pale blue lace underwear and admired the subtle contours of her toned legs and pert athletic backside. Her chest was modest, but perfectly proportional, giving her a confident, unassuming presence. Her name, he would soon learn, was Betty. The third woman caught Mark's attention as she twirled on the grass, golden hair flowing in loose waves down her back. Emily was smaller than the others, with a dancer's build, slender, delicate, yet curvy in the right places. She wore a loose plaid shirt over white leggings that hinted at the elegant shape of her hips. When she bent to tie her shoelace, Mark noticed the faint outline of soft white lingerie, her form almost ethereal in the golden evening light. Her large blue eyes sparkled with humor and innocence, her laughter light as a bell. Despite his initial awkwardness, Mark felt drawn into the warmth of their company. The women welcomed him and Jake with a mix of curiosity and excitement, quickly making room for them around the fire. As the evening wore on, Mark found himself caught up in the carefree atmosphere. Stories and jokes, grilled marshmallows, and songs played on a battered old guitar. Jake seemed to hit it off instantly with Betty, their banter playful and full of energy. Mark, meanwhile, found himself continually stealing glances at Linda, the redhead, whose green eyes seemed to linger on him a moment longer than necessary. She moved with quiet confidence, her laughter genuine and infectious, her presence subtly magnetic. By the time darkness settled over the campsite, Mark felt more alive than he had in years. The night was thick with possibility, the air fragrant with pine and smoke. For the first time in a long while, the familiar boundaries of his life felt as though they might be gently shifting, opening up to something new, something unknown. He tried to remind himself of Sarah, her steady affection, her gentle voice. But here, under the trees and stars, it was difficult to remember why he had ever wanted things to stay the same. The laughter and music continued late into the night. Jake excused himself to take a phone call, disappearing into the darkness, while Mark lingered near the fire, the crackle of the flames echoing the restless beat of his heart. He realized almost with a sense of wonder that anything might happen, and for the first time he thought he might let it. The sun sank behind the lake, painting the sky with streaks of orange and violet. By now, the party had grown louder, the women relaxed, their laughter mingling with the gentle rhythm of water lapping against the shore. Mark, glass in hand, found himself drawn further into the circle of new friends. Linda, her copper hair catching fire in the last rays of daylight, was the center of every conversation. She joked easily, her words touched with playful wit. As the night deepened, she moved closer to Mark, their knees occasionally brushing under the table. Jake was already in his element, leaning in close to Betty, his blonde head bobbing as he whispered something that made her giggle and nudge him back. Mark caught their glances, quick, hungry, but innocent enough to pass for friendly. Emily, spinning her empty cup in her fingers, watched with wide blue eyes, clearly entertained by all the flirting. A second bottle of wine appeared, then a third. Someone put on a playlist of old pop songs and Emily coaxed everyone to their feet, calling for a dance. Mark hesitated. He was not much of a dancer, but Linda took his hand, pulling him into the grass beneath the fairy lights. They danced close, swaying in time to the music. Linda's body pressed against his, her warmth tangible even through her clothes. Her hands rested lightly on his waist, her fingers tracing small, electric circles along his side. Mark felt the line between innocent fun and something much more dangerous begin to blur. Linda's green eyes found his in the half-dark. Their faces were inches apart. Mark inhaled her perfume, sweet and floral, and felt his pulse quicken. She let her hands slip down, her fingers lightly brushing the waistband of his jeans. It was not quite accidental. There was intent in her touch, bold and teasing. Mark's own hand settled at her hips, feeling the curve beneath the thin fabric of her shorts. The delicate edge of her lace underwear soft beneath his palm. They swayed like that for a long moment, caught in a bubble of private electricity, the rest of the party fading into background noise. The song ended, but Linda did not move away. Instead, she leaned in, her lips nearly brushing his ear. "I like your style, Mark," she whispered, her voice low and playful. He shivered, uncertain whether from the evening chill or something else entirely. Jake rejoined the group, his face flushed and eyes bright. "Hey, you two," he grinned. "Are we keeping you from something?" Betty rolled her eyes and pulled him away, but not before shooting Linda a knowing look. Mark tried to shake off the feeling, but every time he looked at Linda, he felt that magnetic pull. They sat together by the fire, their knees touching, sharing stories. Linda's laughter seemed designed just for him, her smile softening every time their eyes met. She tugged at her blouse absent-mindedly, revealing a bit more of her collarbone and the lace edge of her bra. Mark tried not to stare, but found it impossible to look away. As the night wore on, the group split up. Jake and Betty wandered down to the water's edge, laughing and tossing pebbles into the lake. Emily disappeared into her tent, humming to herself. Mark and Linda were left alone. The world reduced to the glow of firelight and the soft hum of insects. Linda stretched out on the blanket, her long legs crossing gracefully. "You seem different from the others," she said quietly. "I mean, most men, they try too hard. But you..." She let the sentence hang. Mark shrugged, feeling the old pull of modesty warring with his newfound excitement. "Maybe I just like listening." Linda smiled. "And what do you hear?" She leaned closer, her hair brushing his cheek. He felt the tension between them stretch almost to breaking. Linda placed her hand on his thigh, her touch feather light at first, then firmer. Mark's breath caught. She moved her hand slowly, tracing along the seam of his jeans, her nails barely scraping the fabric. His own hand, almost of its own accord, found its way to her back, feeling the warmth of her skin through the thin cotton of her blouse. Their lips met, soft and hesitant at first. A question asked and answered in the same instant. The kiss deepened, Linda's tongue gently seeking his, her body pressing closer. Mark's heart raced, his senses overwhelmed by the feel of her in his arms. She shifted, allowing him to feel the softness of her breasts against his chest, the steady thrum of her pulse matching his. Her hand slipped under his shirt, stroking the hard lines of his stomach, her touch sending fire through his veins. They pulled back, breathless, staring at each other in the golden firelight. Linda smiled, her cheeks flushed. "Not bad for a fisherman," she teased, her voice shaking just slightly. Mark laughed, feeling a wild, dizzy happiness. "I think I could get used to this." They sat for a while longer, talking in low voices, sharing bits of their lives. Mark learned that Linda was an artist, that she loved wild places and old books, that she was single and happy to be so, at least most of the time. In return, he found himself revealing more than he'd intended. The stress of his job, his doubts about his marriage, the ache for something new. Linda listened, her eyes kind, never judging. She leaned her head on his shoulder, her hand finding his again, fingers interlacing. Eventually, Jake and Betty returned, their hair windblown, eyes bright with mischief. "Looks like everyone had a good time," Betty said, flopping down beside Linda and grinning at Mark. Emily emerged from her tent, sleepy-eyed and smiling. "You guys are too loud," she yawned, stretching in a way that drew everyone's attention to her delicate curves and the faint lines of her white underwear beneath her leggings. For a moment, the group just laughed, the tension easing. As the fire burned low, the women gathered their things and made their way to their tents. Linda lingered, giving Mark's hand one last squeeze before slipping away. "See you in the morning, fisherman," she said, her voice a promise and a challenge. Mark lay awake long after, staring at the stars through the thin roof of his borrowed tent. The taste of Linda's kiss lingered on his lips, her scent in his mind. He felt guilty, but also thrilled, alive in a way he hadn't been for years. He knew tomorrow would bring new questions, new temptations. But tonight, he let himself drift in the glow of possibility. His world already changed. Morning at the campsite dawned bright and fresh, the sky washed clean by the briefest hint of dawn mist. Mark awoke slowly, every muscle relaxed but his mind alert, replaying the heat of Linda's touch and the softness of her lips against his own. As he stepped from the tent, stretching in the golden light, he was met with the inviting scent of coffee and laughter, already drifting from the center of the campground. The women were already awake, gathered around a makeshift breakfast table. Linda, with her wild red hair pulled into a loose ponytail, pouring coffee into paper cups. Betty in a sky blue hoodie and tiny athletic shorts, her legs curled underneath her. On the bench, Emily in a thin yellow sundress, her blonde hair a halo in the sun. Jake, ever the social butterfly, was flipping pancakes and telling stories, his voice rising above the quiet hum of morning. Linda caught Mark's eye and smiled. A private, knowing smile that sent a surge of excitement through him. He joined her at the table, accepting a cup of coffee, their fingers brushing as she handed it to him. It was a small touch, but it meant everything. Breakfast was lively. Everyone joked and teased, telling stories from the night before, and planning a lazy day at the lake. Mark found himself watching Linda more than anyone, his mind wandering to their dance, their kiss, the way her hands had explored him with such gentle confidence. She noticed, of course, her eyes glinting with secret delight every time she caught his gaze. The group spent the day lounging in the sun, swimming, and playing games on the sand. Linda wore a simple green bikini that highlighted her tall, elegant figure. The gentle curve of her hips, the fullness of her chest, and the flawless smoothness of her skin. Betty opted for a sporty two-piece, the pale blue fabric accentuating her toned abs and strong petite frame. Emily, always a touch shyer, wore a white swimsuit that was modest, but hinted at her delicate curves and soft, youthful beauty. For hours, the day felt timeless, an endless stretch of sun and laughter, far from the responsibilities and worries of everyday life. Mark lost himself in it, allowing Linda's presence to color every moment with a sense of delicious possibility. But as the sun began to dip and the shadows lengthened, the mood at the campsite shifted. Just as they were gathering firewood for the evening, the sound of a car approaching broke the gentle quiet. A dark pickup truck pulled up beside the main road, dust swirling in its wake. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out. His hair was close-cropped and dark, his posture tense. He wore a plain white t-shirt stretched across muscular shoulders, faded jeans and heavy work boots. There was something unmistakably intense about him, an energy that seemed to ripple through the air. The women stiffened, glancing at one another. Linda's expression faltered just a moment before she put on a bright, practiced smile. "Rob?" Betty called, her voice a little too cheerful. "What are you doing here?" Rob looked at Linda, his dark eyes sharp. "I heard there was a party out here. Thought I'd join in." Mark felt the temperature drop. He watched as Rob's gaze moved from face to face, finally settling on Linda. There was history there. Old wounds, maybe, or unfinished business. Rob's attention flicked to Mark, lingering just a second too long, and Mark felt himself tense. Jake tried to break the ice, clapping Rob on the back and offering him a drink, but the atmosphere was already changed. Rob's presence was a storm on the horizon, something unpredictable and possibly dangerous. Linda did her best to keep the mood light, leading the group back to the fire. But Rob followed close behind, his eyes always on her. He joined in the games and the laughter, but something in his manner was possessive. His glances at Mark edged with warning. As dusk settled and the fire blazed higher, Linda drifted away from the group, making her way down to the water's edge. Mark followed her, heart pounding. She stood with her arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the shimmering lake. Mark stepped close, their shoulders almost touching. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded, her voice a whisper. "He was not supposed to come. We broke up months ago, but he doesn't let go easily." Mark felt a surge of protectiveness, mixed with a flash of jealousy he could not explain. "Do you want me to stay?" Linda smiled up at him, her eyes shining in the dusk. "Yes." Before he could say another word, she leaned in, pressing her lips to his. The world faded away. There was only the warmth of her body, the softness of her mouth, the heat building between them. Mark's arms went around her, drawing her closer. Her hands slid beneath his shirt, her fingers exploring the hard muscles of his back. Her touch sending shivers down his spine. She pressed her body against him, her curves fitting perfectly to his. The green bikini, barely there, revealed just enough to make his imagination race. He ran his hands down her sides, over her waist, feeling the delicate lace of her bikini bottoms beneath his fingertips. Linda's breath quickened as their kisses deepened, her body arching into his with want and trust. A sudden noise shattered their moment, a branch snapping, footsteps on gravel. They broke apart instantly, heart pounding. Rob's voice called from up the path, too close for comfort. Linda pressed a finger to her lips, eyes wide. Mark held his breath as Rob's silhouette appeared at the top of the path, his face unreadable in the firelight. "Linda," Robbie called, suspicion heavy in his tone. She forced a smile, her voice steady. "I'm here. Just getting some air." Rob eyed Mark, then turned his attention back to Linda. "We should talk." Linda glanced at Mark, her look apologetic, but determined. "Later," she mouthed, squeezing his hand one last time before following Rob back to camp. Mark remained at the water's edge, the tension in his chest tight and unresolved. The lake was quiet again, but the magic of the night had shifted. Now every shadow seemed to hold a secret, every whisper a threat. He returned to the fire, where the group was trying to pretend everything was normal. Betty shot him a worried glance. Jake tried to lighten the mood with a story about their high school days, but even he seemed rattled. Rob and Linda sat a little apart from the others, their conversation low and tense. Mark could not sleep that night. He lay in his tent, listening to the soft sounds of the camp, his mind racing. The joy of the day was gone, replaced by something darker, sharper. A new awareness of risk, of the line between desire and danger. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew that everything had changed. Dawn was slow to come, painting the sky in tentative shades of grey and rose. Mark barely slept, the restless churn of his thoughts keeping him on the thin edge between dreaming and wakefulness. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Linda's face, her lips parted in longing, her gaze luminous with secrets, the ghost of her touch still hot on his skin. The campground stirred to life with the rising sun. Rob was already up, stalking around the picnic tables with the rigid energy of someone unused to being ignored. He offered little more than a nod to Mark and Jake, his dark eyes flicking toward Linda's tent at every opportunity. Mark tried to act normal, brewing coffee and making small talk with Jake, but the tension in the air was palpable. Betty and Emily were unusually quiet, sensing the unspoken drama simmering just below the surface. Linda emerged last. She had changed into a simple summer dress, the pale blue fabric brushing the tops of her bare legs, her hair falling in tousled waves down her back. She looked every bit as radiant as the first night, but there was a new firmness in her posture, a kind of self-assurance that Mark had not seen before. Breakfast was a strange, silent affair, punctuated by Rob's sharp glances and the forced politeness of everyone else. The women exchanged worried looks, clearly uncomfortable with Rob's presence. Mark tried to catch Linda's eye, but she avoided his gaze, staring off into the distance as she sipped her coffee. After breakfast, the group split up, some going to the lake, others disappearing for a walk in the woods. Mark wandered aimlessly, feeling lost, until he found himself alone at the edge of the campground. The quiet was heavy, broken only by the faint cries of birds in the trees. He was about to turn back when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to find Linda standing there, arms folded across her chest, her eyes searching his. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice low. Mark nodded, his heart racing. They walked in silence to a secluded spot near the water. The sun was climbing higher now, shimmering on the lake's surface. Linda stopped, wrapping her arms around herself, her back to Mark. "I did not want things to get so complicated," she began. Rob and we were together a long time. It was passionate, but it was never right. He could never let go, even when we finally ended it. She paused, taking a deep breath. Mark waited, the gentle lapping of water filling the silence between them. Linda turned to face him, her green eyes shining. I need to be honest with you, Mark. Last night, I felt something I haven't felt in a long time. With you. But that's not the whole truth. She hesitated, searching his face for a reaction. I knew about you before this trip, she admitted. I saw you on social media. Mutual friends, camping photos. When Betty said you and Jake were coming, I hoped we would meet. I wanted it to be an accident, but I guess I made sure it was not. Mark stared at her, stunned. You planned this? Not everything, Linda said quickly, her cheeks flushing. But I wanted to see you. I wanted to know what it would be like. She stepped closer, reaching for his hand, her touch trembling and vulnerable. Mark squeezed her fingers, feeling the spark that had first drawn them together flare anew. Linda pressed her body to his, her head resting against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly. She tilted her face up, her lips brushing his jaw, soft, desperate, searching for comfort. Mark lifted her chin, and their lips met in a slow, aching kiss. Linda's dress slipped from her shoulder, exposing the delicate line of her collarbone and the strap of her pale blue bra. Mark trailed his fingers along her bare skin, marveling at its smoothness, the heat beneath. She gasped softly as his hand settled on her waist, his thumb tracing the edge of her panties beneath the light fabric. For a moment, the world was only the two of them, breathless, lost, and utterly honest in their need. Linda broke away first, her breath shaky. I'm sorry for the secrets. I could not help myself. Mark stroked her hair, letting the silence linger. He was not angry. If anything, he was fascinated by the strange turn his life had taken, by the sense that this meeting was both accident and fate. But what about Rob? He asked quietly. Linda looked away. He will leave eventually. He has to. As if summoned by their words, Rob's voice echoed from the trees nearby. Linda, are you out here? Linda's jaw tightened, but she did not flinch. Stay here, she whispered to Mark, then walked back up the path, her shoulders straight and proud. Mark watched her go, torn between the urge to protect her and the knowledge that some battles could only be fought alone. He waited a few minutes, then made his way back to camp, his mind buzzing with everything Linda had revealed. He saw Rob and Linda talking by the car, Rob's gestures sharp, Linda's expression unreadable. The others kept their distance, clearly sensing the storm about to break. Betty and Emily found Mark by the picnic tables. Are you all right? Betty asked, her eyes kind. He hesitated, then nodded. I think so. Emily leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. Linda really likes you, you know. Mark smiled, uncertain. I like her too. They all looked out across the lake, the day suddenly feeling heavy with meaning. There were more secrets here than anyone had guessed. Old wounds, hidden hopes, tangled desires. Mark wondered what else he did not know and what would come next. As the sun climbed higher, Linda returned, her face composed, but her eyes red. Rob was gone. The group tried to pick up where they left off, but something had shifted. An unspoken understanding that this weekend was not just about fun anymore. Later, Mark and Linda found a moment alone. She touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Their lips met in another soft, lingering kiss, full of promise and uncertainty. Her body fit perfectly against his, the light summer dress sliding over her curves, the hint of lace beneath a tantalizing secret. Mark let his hands wander, learning the shape of her. Gentle, respectful, hungry. Linda moaned softly into his mouth, her desire matching his own. When they finally parted, Linda smiled, sadness and hope mingling in her eyes. Maybe this was meant to happen, she whispered. Mark did not have an answer, but for now, it was enough just to believe it was possible. The day felt longer than any that had come before, every hour charged with a new kind of tension. The sun rose higher, bathing the camp in golden light. But Mark felt like he was standing in a shadow he could not escape. Rob's sudden departure left everyone uneasy, as though a storm had swept through and left behind stillness that was not peace but anticipation. Linda did her best to act as if nothing had changed, but Mark saw the strain behind her easy smile. The others picked up on it too. Betty grew quiet and withdrawn, sticking close to Emily, whose attempts to lighten the mood seemed forced. Jake, ever the peacemaker, tried to get everyone to play volleyball near the lake, but even he could not dispel the cloud that hung over the group. Mark wanted nothing more than to slip away with Linda, to find again the sense of freedom he'd felt when it was just the two of them under the trees. But guilt gnawed at him. Thoughts of Sarah flickered in his mind, her steady love now a distant echo against the chaos of his own desire. He found Jake at the edge of the camp, staring out at the water, lost in thought. Mark hesitated, then joined him, feeling the need for honesty pressing at his chest. Jake glanced at him, a shadow of concern in his eyes. "You and Linda," he said quietly. "It's getting serious, huh?" Mark tried to deflect, but Jake cut him off with a small, sad smile. "I saw you last night. I know what's going on. You know what's at stake?" Mark's shoulders sagged. He had no words, none that could capture the tangled web of feelings inside him. Jake's tone grew sharper. "You have a good life, Mark. A wife who loves you. Don't blow it for something that won't last." Mark's jaw clenched. "You do not understand, Jake. It's not that simple." Jake shook his head. "It never is. But when the dust settles, someone always gets hurt. Usually, it's the one who had nothing to do with any of it." Mark looked away, shame burning in his chest. He knew Jake was right, but it did nothing to quiet the ache that grew every time he thought of Linda. The way she looked at him, the way she made him feel alive. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Jake sighed and patted Mark's shoulder before walking away. The words hung between them, unspoken but heavy. Linda found Mark alone by the lake, sitting on a fallen log with his head in his hands. She sat beside him, slipping her hand into his, her touch gentle but insistent. She leaned in, her lips brushing his ear. "Let them talk," she whispered. For this moment, let it just be us. Mark turned to her, searching her eyes for doubt, but found only longing. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. Linda melted into him, her hands tangling in his hair as their lips met in a deep, searching kiss. Mark's hands slid down her back, tracing the curve of her waist, feeling the rise and fall of her breath beneath the thin fabric of her summer dress. She pressed closer, her body arching against him, the heat between them flaring. He slipped a hand under her dress, feeling the delicate lace of her panties, the warmth of her skin, the strength of her desire for him. Linda gasped softly, her body trembling in his embrace. For a moment, nothing else existed but their connection. Raw, honest, and overwhelming. They parted, breathing hard, and Linda pressed her forehead to his. "Well, we have to be careful," she whispered, her voice trembling. "People are starting to notice." Mark nodded, the reality of their situation settling over him like a weight. He wanted to promise her everything, to run away, to make this wild, impossible feeling last. But he knew it was a fantasy. As they made their way back to camp, Mark felt every eye on them. Betty's gaze was sympathetic, Emily's wary. Even Jake looked at him differently, as if seeing someone he did not quite recognize. The women whispered among themselves, their voices low but urgent. Mark realized how little control he had over the story now, how easily secrets became gossip, how quickly desire could turn to disaster. That afternoon, as the group gathered for one last barbecue by the lake, Rob returned. He moved through the camp like a storm cloud, his eyes fixed on Linda, his anger barely contained. He cornered her near the water's edge, his voice low but intense. Mark watched helplessly from a distance as Linda stood her ground, her posture defiant. Betty and Emily hovered nearby, ready to intervene if things escalated. Mark felt the conflict knotting in his gut, a collision course that could not be avoided. When Rob finally left, his fury obvious, Linda returned to the group, her cheeks flushed and her hands shaking. She shot Mark a look that was both apology and warning. As night fell, Mark and Linda found one last moment alone, hiding from the curious eyes and whispered judgments. Linda's hands trembled as she reached for Mark, her body seeking comfort in his embrace. He kissed her slowly, deeply, pouring all his longing and fear into the moment. Their bodies fit together perfectly, her skin hot beneath his touch, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Mark explored her gently, memorizing the lines of her body, the softness of her breasts beneath the lace of her bra, the curve of her hips, the strength in her thighs. Linda arched into him, her need as urgent as his own. They moved together, lost in each other, the world reduced to heat and breath and the steady rhythm of their hearts. Afterward, Linda rested her head on his chest, silent tears wetting his shirt. Mark held her close, unable to promise her anything except the truth of that moment. They returned to camp hand in hand, aware that nothing would ever be quite the same. That night, the campfire burned lower than before, the laughter softer, the stories tinged with sadness and longing. The women retreated to their tents early. Jake sat alone by the fire, staring into the embers, his thoughts his own. Mark lay awake, Linda's scent still clinging to him, his heart aching with the knowledge that every choice he made had consequences. Tomorrow, he knew, would bring the reckoning. The first pale light of morning crept through the trees, painting the campground in misty gold. The fire had long since gone out, leaving only a pile of embers and the faint scent of smoke. Mark awoke with Linda still beside him, her hair splayed across his chest, her breathing soft and even. He stroked her hair gently, trying to memorize the feeling, the warmth, the closeness, the thrill that had so swiftly upended his ordinary life. But as the day broke, the fragile peace was shattered by the sudden sound of a car pulling into the camp. It was an unfamiliar sound at this hour, too early for other campers, too purposeful. Mark tensed, instinctively pulling away from Linda, his heart hammering in his chest. A door slammed. Footsteps crunched on gravel. Betty and Emily poked their heads out of their tent, exchanging uneasy glances. Jake, still half asleep, rose and stretched, trying to make sense of the commotion. Then Mark heard a voice he knew better than any other in the world. "Mark, are you here?" Sarah, his wife. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Mark scrambled to his feet, hastily straightening his clothes, his mind racing with panic and guilt and longing. Linda's eyes flew wide, her breath caught in her throat. She quickly composed herself, smoothing her dress and slipping away toward the other women. Sarah appeared from behind the car, suitcase in hand, a bright smile on her face. She looked as beautiful as ever, tall and elegant, her chestnut hair in a soft braid, her eyes clear and loving. She wore a white sundress that highlighted her graceful figure, her skin glowing in the morning light. If she noticed Mark's confusion or the tension in the air, she did not show it. "I wanted to surprise you," Sarah said, her voice gentle, "and see what these fishing weekends are really about." Jake, ever the gracious host, rushed to help her with the luggage. "Sarah, we did not expect you. Mark did not mention you were coming." Sarah laughed. "I thought it would be fun to catch him off guard." The group gathered around, their faces a mix of surprise and forced cheerfulness. Linda kept her distance, a polite smile fixed on her lips. Emily and Betty exchanged anxious glances, but played along, welcoming Sarah and making her feel at home. As everyone sat down to a makeshift breakfast, Mark tried to calm himself. He felt trapped in a surreal dream, his wife at one side, his secret lover at the other, the weight of his choices bearing down on him. He forced himself to smile, to act normal. But every word, every gesture, felt like a test he was destined to fail. Sarah chatted easily with the others, asking about their lives, their jobs, their families. She seemed genuinely pleased to meet Linda, complimenting her on her beautiful hair and her taste in books after spotting a novel beside her bag. "Linda's an artist," Betty chimed in quickly. "She paints landscapes. Maybe she'll show us some later." Linda smiled, her cheeks flushed, and nodded. "Maybe I will." Rob's absence was palpable, and when Sarah asked about the other car she had seen, Betty answered smoothly. A friend had to leave early for work. The morning passed in a tense equilibrium. Mark watched Sarah move through the group, warm and open, completely unaware of the secret current swirling beneath the surface. Guilt gnawed at him, but there was also relief. Sarah's presence offered a shield, a return to the familiar, the safe. But Linda's eyes found his again and again. Quick, searching glances that spoke of longing and regret and a kind of acceptance. Mark realized then that whatever had happened between them could not be undone, but it could be cherished for what it was. A fleeting, beautiful collision of two lives at a crossroads. As the group packed up the campsite, Mark found a note slipped into his bag. Linda's neat handwriting on a scrap of sketchbook paper. Mark, sometimes the heart wants what it cannot keep. Thank you for reminding me that I am alive, that love can still surprise me. Be happy. Find your way. Linda. He read it once, then tucked it away, a bittersweet ache settling in his chest. In the final moments before departure, Mark found Linda by the water, away from the others. Their eyes met, and for a moment, nothing else mattered. Linda reached for his hand, squeezing it gently, her thumb brushing his knuckles. There was no need for words. Everything had already been said. She leaned in and kissed his cheek, her lips lingering, her eyes shimmering with tears. It was a farewell, tender and grateful, filled with all the things they could not say aloud. Sarah called out, and Mark turned away, feeling the weight of the moment press on his heart. He walked back to his wife, who smiled up at him, completely unaware of the storm that had passed so close. The drive home was quiet. Sarah chatted about plans for the weekend, the garden, their friends back in the city. Mark answered when he could, but his mind wandered, tracing every memory of the last few days. The risk, the thrill, the hunger, and finally, the peace of letting go. He realized that the weekend had changed him, not just because of what he had done, but because of what he had learned. That life could surprise him, that his heart was still capable of wild, reckless hope, but also that every choice carried a price, and that sometimes happiness meant holding close what you had, rather than chasing what you could not keep. As they pulled into their driveway, Sarah took his hand, smiling. "You seem different," she said softly. "Are you all right?" Mark squeezed her hand, the warmth of her skin grounding him. "I am," he replied. "I really am." And as they stepped inside, Mark felt the weight lift, replaced by a strange, bright freedom. The knowledge that life, in all its messy beauty, would go on.